we're going to go ahead and get started. I was just telling some of them last weekend, there's probably, what did you say, 15 that showed up. I'm assuming everyone woke up this morning and was like, I'm sleeping in this morning. So thank you so much for coming. We obviously can't do what we do without volunteers and people in the community wanting to help us. So thank you for being here. A couple of quick things. So I think most everybody gave me their background check paper. If not, at a break session, I'll get you one. I think you're good, but at the break, I'll give you one if you didn't get one. There's plenty of food, coffee back there, so feel free to get up and get that. Next week, is it next week? Thursday the 16th, we have our first open house. From 5 to 7, and then another open house Saturday from 9 to 12. So feel free to come by and check out the house. But we would love to meet with each of you one-on-one to get to know you, get to know your schedule, and for you to come see the house, get to know the staff, and all that fun stuff. So without further ado, I guess Casey will take over. Casey's a board member at Her Story, and Sandy's back there. She's a social worker and she's a secretary for Her Story. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Take it away, Case.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So what we'll cover, there's 2 different sessions that I'll do, and then I'll turn it over to more qualified people. The first that we will do is motivational interviewing boundaries. So we prepared this session for a ministry that launched at the church that I attend, which is Apex Community. I guess it's been a year now. So some of this pertains, it is Christian faith-based, the training is, but it was intended for outreach to the substance use community. So we know that there's a loaded lot of, possibly stigma, also a lot of preconceived notions about this population. So we want to give you as much practical ways to intercede for them so that you feel prepared and equipped as much as you can be while still, playing off of or leveraging the love that you have for these people, which I assume is why you're here on a Saturday morning. So thank you for being here. I love the people that we're going to talk about. So I hope that that comes through frequently in this. I also want to, preemptively say that a lot of this is about how to avoid being manipulated. So I love these people. I am a person in long-term recovery myself, which means for me that I haven't used drugs or alcohol for over 12 years. And in that time, God has been really good to me. I came to know Him. I became a father, a husband, a member of a church, a house church shepherd, and a social worker, and chemical dependency counselor. So, these folks are near and dear to my heart, and I hope that that comes through. But some of what I'm going to be sharing with you is kind of about how to navigate these waters, which are dangerous and sometimes difficult to do, very difficult. So there's something in counseling in motivational interviewing which is called the stages of change. Has anybody heard of those other than Sandy, probably? These are ways that in our modern context we know that telling people how bad something is for them is not really a good prevention tactic. Who here was in DARE other than me? I graduated. I still walked through the path of, some substance use issues later in life. So, and there are many still today, marketing campaigns and other things that we do to try to do prevention that essentially tell people how bad it is. But that doesn't really work when contextually it's the best choice they have, maybe, or it makes sense to them contextually. So we have to try to come at them in ways that would be more motivational in our approach. So what we're trying to do is lead them to the answer themselves for whether they're making a choice to continue to use or not. And so by doing that, when the individual makes the choice, it is the best choice for them. It also kind of circumvents you as a liable person for whether that choice goes well or not. So if you tell somebody they need to quit using drugs or they need to go get counseling, and they do that because you told them to, and then it fails, you then become a resource that they don't want to plug back into in the future. But if they came to that conclusion by themselves, then they have more stake in whether that decision goes well or not. They have more perseverance, more persistence about pursuing that goal. So there's 5 stages of change that we'll cover, that you'll encounter people at different points in a continuum, essentially, about whether they're making a decision for their benefit or not. So think about like job changes for yourself, or a choice to move, or a choice to whether to, engage in marriage or not. There's some of those big life decisions. We will all fall into a continuum about whether we're change ready for that decision. So the first one that we want to talk about is pre-contemplation, which means that you are not even contemplating making a choice to change. This can happen when somebody still believes that drugs or alcohol use are the answer to some of their problems. So there are a lot of reasons why a maladaptive behavior like substance use can come into somebody's life and make sense, like anxiety or abuse and trauma or neglect. And we know that people who enter into treatment suffer abuse and neglect or trauma at like 80% or more. People who are coming in for a treatment of a substance use disorder. So lots of people have lots of various reasons to use drugs and alcohol. Just because society or you tell them that it's a bad idea doesn't mean that that's going to make sense to them. So this would be where they were at, pre-contemplation. They probably see it as a solution still for something that's going on, and many times like a mental health issue or other things could be the reason. What your approach is going to be, and this is where it becomes practical, probably people won't arrive at her story in pre-contemplation because they'll have some awareness that there's an issue, and if there's some awareness, you're working into the right area as far as change readiness. But if they're in pre-contemplation, our goal should be to roll with their resistance, to engage them with ways that would allow you to continue to be a resource in their life, and to essentially allow yourself to be adjacent to the person enough that when they're ready to make a decision to change, that you're available and you're seen as a resource, not as another authority that's choking the bejesus out of them. So how you do that is this. When they say they're not sure if they're ready to quit or not, you say things like, when will you be ready? What could you do if you were in recovery? Or why did you come in here in the first place? What are the reasons? And not in a confrontational way. You want them to see you, because trust me, somebody has tried that before. They wouldn't have arrived at your doorstep, at her story's door, without having had probably most of their friends and family tell them what a bad person they are, or what bad decisions they've been making. That's why they need you as a resource, because they probably exhausted all those other ones. So try something different, roll with it and allow that resistance to be something that you don't exercise judgment when they're resistant, because that will put you out of the realm of having a rapport with the person later, which would be necessary in order to practically work with them. So yeah, I guess I pretty much said all that. Educate yourself regarding the resources available also. So some of that will happen today, some of it will happen as you just get some experience. But if that person's change readiness shifts into the next couple categories, you better know where to take them or what to do, because you don't want to be left without a next step if they do kind of move into a category of more change readiness. So then contemplation. We all know what it's like to have the angel and the devil on our shoulder, like Homer does in this picture, because it seems like the Christian walk. It seems like a picture of what it looks like to make most major decisions. And wouldn't the individual who is in a substance use, continuum, when they're in there, they're being rewarded by their substance use exponentially greater than any activity you can do naturally. So sex creates a certain amount of dopamine. Somebody who's using even the most benign drugs is getting like 4 times more dopamine based on their substance use than they are in any other natural occurrence. So we're intended to get dopamine like a little hamster drinking out of the bottle in the cage, just a little drip at a time. But they've been getting it like full force, fire hose, for a long time. So in order for them to be able to contemplate reasonably changing that behavior and that decision, you have to put a lot on the other side of the scale in order to tip the balance. Now, consequences are typically part of this. There's nobody who comes into change readiness for their substance use without consequence. That doesn't mean that you need to provide them for them, but it does mean that if they've incurred a consequence because of their behavior, they need to have that consequence. Because if you take it away from them, what is their incentive to change? Has anybody heard Pavlov's dogs before? It's pretty famous. They demonstrated through that experiment that dogs were conditioned that when you ring a bell, you could teach them, basically their body, to have an autonomic response that they would salivate and be prepared to eat. Well, drugs are way more rewarding than food is to a dog. And if you take away the consequence, say if somebody comes over the top and they are overreacting to their withdrawal symptoms, well, if you respond with money, you just rewarded them for overreacting, essentially. And that can become a conditioned behavior. So anyway, when we're in contemplation, they're thinking about the change. So your goal in this relationship at this time is to educate them. Here's what resources are out there. Here's how many people are in recovery. I know some, whatever you want to say. That encourages them to understand that they're not alone and that there are pathways that they can engage with that can take them out of their former substance use. That's probably the biggest lie, or the thing that Satan is doing the best through addiction, is isolating people. So it's very, very easy for that person to lose sight of the fact that there's help out there, that there are people who recover, all those things. It's very important that you would be able to be that agent that says, like, there's a way out, there's a way out. You may have to say it 200 times. But that is the message that Satan has told people and suppressed, is that, you're on your own and there's no chance. There's no way you can get better from this. And to the individual, that does seem like truth because it's such an integral part of their life, and it's the only way that they probably feel good. So imagine taking that away. If it's Jesus for you, imagine somebody just plucking that out of your life, your confidant, your coping strategy, all that. That's a very difficult move, or a very difficult thing to conceptualize. So this is a stage in the change process. By the way, if you have any questions, just interrupt me. You can raise your hand or just speak up. That's okay. If you're alongside the person during contemplation stage, you want to be able to support them and help them continue to identify when they're going to be ready to take next steps. So what is it going to take? When will you be ready? What are the things that are going to have to happen in order for us to get there? Know where you need to take this person and be prepared to drop everything when they ask. If they say, I want to go to treatment today, or I want to go to an NA meeting today, you better know where to go and be prepared to take them in that instant. Now for her story, they'll already be working into this stage. So, more than likely they've already taken the action. So that's already a pretty bold step on their part. And that puts them more in the preparation stage. So they're aligning themselves to go into these variety of resources and pathways that can help them recover. This can be one of a ton of different things, and there's many, many different pathways to recovery. I should be very blunt here. God is the solution to addiction. However, you would be naive to think that that is the only thing that this person needs. Because just because they repent and accept Jesus, listen, they've come by this from probably trauma and neglect. Their substance use made sense to them at some level. They have social, spiritual, socioeconomic, housing, and vocational issues that need to be resolved. And they're coming to you empty and broken. And Jesus filled you up, and praise God for that. But if you think that's the only thing that they need, you're being naive. They need a whole lot more than that. Jesus can fulfill all those things and will, if the person gives their life up to them. But if you have another hit and run where, you say, well, that was pretty much all that they needed, and you walk away, you will have been just like everybody else that ever approached them from a church, and that's the reason why they didn't want to come to you in the first place. So be very careful about your engagement, and your love practically shown to this person is spelled this way, Time. I think I spelled that right. You have to be long course view about this, because that's when you're going to demonstrate that you're different. That's when you're going to demonstrate that you are, somebody who, even though, they're vomiting on themselves and you're still willing to be there. You're still willing to come, supply energy that they need. So in the preparation stage, they may be cutting off contact with former associates, removing the phones from their life, turning off social media, potentially that could cause triggers. They may be moving into her story, moving out of a situation that was, difficult for them. Almost everybody, the soil that they come out of is probably not good. So you're transplanting them into your healthier soil for a moment in time and a moment in their life. And so a lot of what they came out of still needs to be treated. It still needs to be fertilized and nurtured in order for them to go back into that environment and be healthy. So that could be other parts of the preparation stage. This is probably the time. Preparation and action is when you'll find most of our folks. The goal for you in this stage is to continue to educate and continue to get resources and really understand, what is the Family Violence Prevention Center? What are the qualifications that they need to get into there? Because if somebody's coming out of an abusive relationship, you don't want to try to figure it out in that moment. You want to know that ahead of time. And of course, we're here to help you with that. But this is a really daunting, recovery is a daunting thing for the individual to enter into. And the resources are oftentimes really frustrating, really slow. A lot of them are nonprofits, which if anybody knows what that's like, it's difficult. So you have to be prepared. And imagine, it's hard for us to help somebody enter into that. Imagine being in withdrawal and having to go through calling, 8 times, or going and sitting at a assessment where you might have to wait 45 minutes just to be seen. That or more. Come to TCM. I work at TCM, by the way. But, that's difficult, right? That's not always great. So you want to help the person be prepared for those types of experiences and help them be resilient. So action. This is where you want people to be. And more than likely, if they set foot in your Her Story house, they will have been in the action phase just implicitly. So they can choose one of a variety of pathways, and we operate Her Story, I'll speak for Her Story a little bit. We're going to allow them to enter into a lot of the more traditional supports like treatment and other 12-step things like that, because if you think that you know the only way for this person to get into recovery, you're wrong. They know how, and it needs to be their idea. Otherwise, it's not the right idea for them. So you're going to allow them to take whatever pathway they choose, as long as there is a pathway, and you're going to support that. Even if they don't say Jesus in AA meetings. Look, the problem is too bad for us to be discriminatory against resources that are potentially non-Christian. They just, whatever works. You preserve the life of that individual long enough, and Jesus, has the opportunity to come in exponentially more. So let's be in the life preservation business and let the pathway or, all that stuff, just let the individual figure that out because it's up to them. And, you're not going to be there. So, if it's your idea that they should go to Celebrate Recovery and then they don't ever know you beyond 3 weeks in their life, what stick-to-itiveness do they have? What would be their motivation to stay in the resource that you prompted or that you pressured them to go into? Let them choose. As long as they're doing something for momentum, we're good. So that's why all these are listed up there. While they're in the action stage, if you are an individual who's in service to this population, it would be really wise to go to Al-Anon yourself or to take them to meetings, which you'll do if you're a volunteer in the house at times. Sit in on the meeting if it's an open meeting and see what it's like. If you wonder why they need those people at times and that why they're a better resource than you are, go find out. That's okay. You would have been the first person in an Al-Anon meeting who said, I'm just here because I love people. Most of them have some skin in the game. So FOA, another good resource for the families. Also, NAMI, not listed up here, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, would be great to investigate also. Because mental health issues and substance use go together, almost in every person that you'll encounter. So begin to help them with some of the empowerment activities that might be. So there's going to be many, many times in their recovery journey where decisions will need to be made about, do I go back to drug use or not? And there are some things that can aid the individual in making a better decision. It's usually, continuing to try to tip the scales in the positive direction. And those can be things like driver's license, navigating entitlements, insurance, vocational assistance, housing, which of course, will be part of it. Those are all things, treatment, enrollment and engagement in treatment. You can empower and encourage and enable all those good behaviors. Essentially every action you take with this individual is going to be enabling something. So if you ever have a question about whether what you're doing is right, ask yourself, what am I enabling? What is the behavior that I'm doing going to enable this individual to do? If it's for them to engage in, something that's going to be positive for them, great. If they could and should do it on their own, you probably need to let them do it. Because you can encourage them to do it, but those are part of the things that it means to recover. It's part of what it looks like to suffer the consequences of your behavior. So if there are no consequences, of course, nobody has any change readiness, and they'll be back in the pre-contemplation. So you want to encourage them to have, just enable and encourage good behavior. And then after they've accomplished 6 months of abstinence, they'll be in the maintenance phase. Something has worked for them at this point, otherwise they wouldn't have gotten 6 months. Now, exposure is part of relapse prevention. Not that they need to be in the same room with heroin again, but they're going to be exposed to triggers. Who knows what a trigger is? Something that makes you want to use. And they may not even know what it was, right? So, I probably shouldn't ask. Other than me, I don't know if anybody in the room has smoked pot. And Tim is in the back, so I don't know if I'd admit it if I was you anyway. but when you smell a skunk, when you're going down the road, it smells like weed. So, that can be a trigger, and the person may, in the back of their brain, have a flash that says, oh, you want to smoke pot right now, and they don't even know why. They can be, 5 the sensory things, and they can be as quick as, 0.2 seconds. They've done a study where they showed quick flashes of, needles and other things that are associated with drug use to people, and asked them later where they, did they have a stronger craving or desire to use, and they said yes, even though it didn't register on their conscious brain what they saw, they still had a greater desire to use drugs based on something that just registered in their subconscious. So that is very possible with triggers to use. The individual may be in a neighborhood that they, used to frequent or something like that. They may be completely unaware of what it was that did it. So part of the way that they're going to be successful is to fight those triggers in healthy ways. And coping strategies, renewed and refreshed, that don't have to do with using are going to be necessary. So if you shelter them and you try to carry them through, this is essentially what we've tried to do with incarceration. If you try to put them on the shelf for 3 years, guess what the recidivism rate is into the criminal justice system? 97%. So that's how poorly that works. We have to allow them to develop coping strategies apart from their substance use. So that's happened and been developed in the maintenance phase. And the goal of engagement in this phase is to help them learn how to shift from using the resources and what's been offered to them to giving the resources and giving back from to the recovery community so that they can begin to grow those proteins and that empathy part of their brain that's kind of been neglected. This is typically how people maintain their recovery, is by giving back to others. And it doesn't mean that they have to be giving back to others in the recovery community, but that's a really easy on-ramp for rapport building. You're going to encounter this. People are going to say, you don't know what it's like. What are you going to say when they say that? I'm okay with silence.
You're right.
Yeah, thank you, social worker. Yes, you're going to say, you're right, I don't know what it's like to do heroin and suffocate on myself while I'm throwing up in the bathtub. But please help me understand what it's like. Tell me what it's like. You're right, I don't get it. I never will, probably. Hopefully. But try to help me understand what's going on. Some questions that you might want to ask are like, what have you been through? What brought you to this point? Not, how could you, that type of stuff. So here's the continuum a little bit. Sorry if it's printed small on your thing. So boundaries. This is really important because the worst thing that could happen to you if you came into a volunteer situation like this for our population is that you would have a bad experience and you would choose to never help them again. There's a certain stigma attached to people with substance use disorders for a reason. We earned it, some of it. We do engage in behaviors which are at times inflammatory and things that you will have a hard time understanding. So what we want you to do is be able to present with boundaries, even from the very beginning, that give you enough closeness to the individual to make a difference, but you want to maintain your own health and safety. Okay? So because they're entering into a housing situation which you're going to kind of be in a controlled environment, you've eliminated some of what could be problematic. You don't want to go into their homes, that type of thing. But in general, enabling for our purposes is going to be defined by doing anything for the individual that they could and should do for themselves. So that is a wide net. But if they cannot or should not do what they're asking you to do for themselves, then you're probably good. That's called helping. So there's a difference. You don't ever give them cash. Just in case that was a question, don't do that. We know where that's going to go, right? And God bless our folks. But I've had people die. I've had people sell fentanyl to others who died, and then they dumped their body. I've had people spend years 8 to 21 of their daughter's life in incarceration, or at least I presume he will be, because that's what he's sentenced to. And for my health and well-being, I have to be able to go to bed at night saying I did what I could. Because otherwise, you're not going to be doing this for very long. So you need to take, and by saying I did what I could, I don't mean I gave them the $20. I mean, I was realistic and honest about what was really going on, and I wasn't afraid to call it out because of discomfort. Because they will probably play on a feeling of you wanting to avoid being uncomfortable. You know, that's like somebody who's trying to manipulate you. That's like their golden window right there. You know, if they can find that they can make you uncomfortable enough, they will certainly do it in order to get what they want. So consequences, reinforce them. Loving support is conditional. I know Jesus said, you know, to let yourself get slapped 490 times, but you're really doing a disservice to the individual if you don't make your assistance to them conditional. So here's a for instance. I'm willing to do this if you're in treatment. I'm willing to help you in this area if you're going to meetings. You know, if you're able to pee in this cup for me, here's what I'm prepared to do. Those are the types of behaviors, black and white, okay? It needs to be clear, and the conditions need to be set up front. And that is being loving, right? Because if they go back out with your $20 and that's the last one they get, you know, that's going to be a detriment to you and to them. So, like, conditional support is love. Rapport and trust in relationships are developed in layers. So, like, your family is your inner circle. You are closest with them. You share more with them. You know, you're probably one or two friends everybody's got. You can't expect that this person's going to come into your, and they probably have a mistrust for you, which is founded in reality, because you're who you are and they are who they are, and for the most part, those two populations have been separate forever. So, you know, don't expect to walk into their life and have them allow you into the inner circle and tell you about their trauma and abuse. They shouldn't tell you that anyway, but if they choose to, that's a boundary issue a little bit if it happens right away, because you have to understand they have a motivation for telling you that, because that's not normal social behavior. Now, they may have found that over time they've been conditioned that if they divulge all this stuff, they get high. And, like, it's really hard to uncondition something that gets you high because it's really, really rewarding. So don't expect to walk into the inner sanctum of what they've got going on. You need to expect to keep them at arm's length, and they will keep you at arm's length for a time until you demonstrate that you're trustworthy. Maybe they see you interacting with some of the other clientele, and you support them and you validate them when they're vulnerable. Those are the ways that trust is built. So, you know, don't expect. So this was tips for people who are working with folks that are out in the community, but, you know, it's okay to meet people in a public place. It's okay to not have them in your home. You know, like that's just being safe. It's just being appropriate. And here's the magic one, probably more than anything. If you continue to use, here's what I'm prepared to do. You know, has anybody watched the show Intervention? This is an intervention. So, like, we don't, that's not the standard, but you have to present a boundary that's healthy for yourself. So if you continue to use, here's what I need to do. And that doesn't mean you cut off all relationship with them, because that will prevent you and them from getting the help that they need. Yes?
I just want to chime in real quick. So, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but this is basically Addiction and Recovery 101. And if you're feeling a lot of responsibility and weight on your shoulders, all of this is not your responsibility in the house. We will have staff there, executive director, we have Sandy, we'll have me leading it, and then, like he mentioned, time is going to be the biggest thing for volunteers. So all of this is just extra in general, that kind of knowledge. So I started to feel a little bit of that for yourself.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah.
These are decades most people have been using for decades, and so it's going to be really difficult. You'll be interceding for them at a time where they're their most vulnerable, probably. So mistakes will happen. You have to be okay with that. It's going to be difficult at times because people are going to go back out, and people are going to leave your relationship and your housing without really going into anything that's good for them, and you know that. But yes.
Isn't it possible, and I've learned this from Greg, they can go back and get in trouble or redo themselves 7 different times before they get straight.
70 times 7.
70.
I would say, yeah, right.
7.
Yeah. So, you can definitely, every time that they engage in a system like her story, like treatment or recovery 12-step meetings, their percentage chance of recovery goes up, long-term sustained recovery. So, don't be, it's kind of like the seed sower. You know, you may not be the one who reaps that person's bounty in their life. You may, but there's a good chance it's going to take a multitude of times before their change readiness and consequences and all that. It's like God aligned 1,000 people in 1,000 situations in my life in order to help me enter into recovery, and it was still almost not enough. You know, like it takes a village. So you're going to play a role, and that's okay. You know, you won't probably see, because of the nature of like the window that you're going to be in, you probably won't see them succeed unless they come back to you and say, here's how I'm doing, which is rare, honestly, even if they are doing well. So don't be discouraged, because you'll see the recidivism. You see the same person 4 times, but you may not see if they ever, kind of cross the threshold into a more successful recovery. So
our intention is to follow them through their whole recovery journey. So their next phase, if it's in treatment, we want to know how they're doing, and when they get out, we want them to know we're there as a support if they still want us in their lives. So.
And that's good for your outcomes too, if you have the ability to measure that for your donors and supporters. This is a loaded topic, I get it. God, the good thing is that apart from your desire to do good for these people, you have, the King who is a greater resource than anything under the sun, and you can most definitely leverage that relationship with him. Because if this was based on your own, if you're motivated by something that happened in your past to be here, that's great, and it's great that it's personal, but like lean on Jesus, lean on your Savior to be able to cover you in grace, because this is going to be tiresome, and when you see people that are struggling, it's really hard, but know that heaven is a reality, and it's closer probably than any of us would like to think when it comes to our own journey. So allow that to be your solace during this, because it's going to be tough at times. But King Jesus can carry you through, because if you were motivated only by your personal desires, you probably, again, will have some shortfalls. But if you allow God's sovereignty and the desire to do His will to be your motivating factor, then you'll probably do really well in this. Because the final story hasn't been written yet for this individual. And you can have faith that that's the case for them. So that's all for the motivational interviewing. Does anybody have any questions, comments, anything? Concerns? This next one will be much shorter. You want to take a break?
Yeah, if you guys want to take just like a quick 10-minute break, and we can come back and finish that one. The restroom, so when you got off the elevator, you go left. So the restrooms are left and then left down that hallway.
Is Beth coming today, Greg?
Just me. Get the B team today.
Yes. It is. I was feeling it. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say,